Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Canadian Film Forum screening, not Fornum. And before we go any further, I will read the land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and celebrate on this land. Well, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the first of 3 Black History Month screenings as part of the Canadian Film Forum. And we are starting off in fantastic fashion with an award-winning film that won the Special Jury Prize at Hot Docs for Canadian Feature Documentary. And we will be joined after the screening by the filmmaker, Yasmine Mathurin, and the moderator, Huda Hassan. So I can simply tell you that this is a riveting documentary with at its center, the subject Josiah Wilson. And it involves issues of racial identity, indigeneity, and basketball. So I hope you will enjoy it and definitely stick around for the Q&A afterwards with our guests. So enjoy the film. Welcome back, everyone. And we will have our Q&A in just a moment. But first, let me introduce our moderator, Huda Hassan. Huda Hassan is a writer and cultural critic. Her writing has appeared in many places, including CBC, Pitchfork, The Fader, ID Magazine, Quill and Choir, and BuzzFeed. Focused on arts and culture reporting, Huda examines the connections between art, placemaking, and power. Huda is currently completing her PhD in Black Feminist and Cultural Studies at the University of Toronto. Her research examines constructions of African Muslims in the Canadian cultural imaginary. Huda was born in Melbourne, Scarborough, and still lives in the borough. In 2017, Flair magazine named her a writer to watch. We're extremely pleased to have her here as our moderator, and I'll let Huda introduce Yasmine Mathurin, the director of our film. Welcome, Huda.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Thank you to Innis Town Hall for this event, specifically Charlie, Sheila, Innis, and Anne for organizing the space. Yasmine Mathurin is a Haitian-Canadian award-winning writer and director and podcast producer. Her first feature documentary film, One of Ours, which she wrote and directed with the support of CBC Documentary Channel and Sienna Films, is the winner of the DGC Special Jury Prize for Canadian Features at the 2021 Hot Docs International Film Festival. She previously worked as an associate producer with CBC Original Podcast. She produced the audio fiction podcast, The Shadows, which won gold in the fiction category at the 2019 Canadian Digital Publishing Award. She also produced season 1 of the CBC podcast, Thai Ass Why, which won a Webby People's Choice Award. Yasmine is also a recipient of the 2019 Netflix Banff Media Diverse 2019 Netflix Banff Media Diverse Voices Fellowship. She is an alumnus of numerous film and storytelling labs, including the Hot Dogs Documentary Lab, the Union Docs Feature Documentary Lab, and the Berlinale Doc Toolbox Program, the Doc Breakthrough Program, and Yale University's Thread Multimedia Storytelling Fellowship. Yasmine has done a lot. She also holds a BA in Political Science and Nonprofit Management from New York University and a Journalism Master's from Ryerson University. Please join me in welcoming Yasmine.
Hi.
What's good? How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm super excited to be here. I'm just happy to see your face. It's been so long.
For the audience, Yasmine and I are former roommates who 10 years ago together imagined ourselves as writers and creators. So this is a very special moment, I think, for the both of us, particularly for me to be sitting with someone who is now officially nominated for 3 Canadian Screen Awards.
Hey. Woo. that.
Congratulations. How are you feeling about that?
I'm super excited. I'm super proud. And I'm also just like in shock at the same time. I think it's just a ball of feelings. But yeah, like it's a bit of a trip. Like, yeah, like we've known each other for quite some time now. And so it's just been like such a wild ride to this point. So I'm trying my best to take it in and not let like the pandemic rob me of these very real moments, you know? So
for sure. Yeah. Cause it's a huge accolade and a huge achievement. And I didn't even really take that in about considering the fact that this is also occurring at a time that we're dealing with a plague.
Yeah, pretty much.
We're in the midst of the plague, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I wanted to dive in with you about one of ours. I watched it last week. I watched a bit of it today with folks. I cried throughout the entire film. I wrote a bit about that for Chatelaine earlier today. There's so much going on with Josiah's story, with Mariah's story, but also the entire Wilson family. And the entire time I kept wondering what was your first point of contact with Josiah and the Wilson family, and how did this situation that was occurring in his life and his world then become a collaborative project between you and the Wilson family to create one of ours?
Yeah, so for a little bit of context, I grew up, I'm from Haiti. I spent my early childhood in Haiti, and I moved to Calgary, Alberta when I was around 11, 12. And so when I moved there, I moved with my aunt. I wasn't with my parents. And so during that time, you know, my aunt wanted us to kind of get to know other kids in the city and the community. And there was a really small Haitian community in Calgary. And so my aunt knew Josiah's parents. And so we were introduced to them sort of, for me, my context was like, hey, here are some 2 Haitian kids. They're adopted. Go play. Like you're a preteen. You're not thinking about anything except just like your life. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, so we kind of grew up around each other within like, so they were part of the Haitian community. When there was like Caribbean Independence Day dinners, everybody was around. And also Mariah, Josiah's sister, who's in the film, her and I were part of a Haitian cultural dance group in Calgary called the Haitian Pearls. So we were part of that dance group for like a number of years afterwards. And so we had that first sort of like, I guess, community connection way back when. But then when I moved to Toronto and like a few years passed, like I kept in touch very loosely, like a lot of people do, just through Facebook. And so in 2016, when the whole news broke out around Josiah's ban from the All Native basketball tournament, that kind of came up on my feed because I had Don, Josiah's dad, on Facebook. And so that's kind of when I was like, oh, what's happening now? Like I mean, it just literally kind of came out of nowhere. And so then in reading what was happening, it was just a lot to wrap my head around, because I think I also realized, I think at that point, is how much, when I was a kid, Josiah's indigeneity wasn't visible to me, right? Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't something that was also talked about. It was sort of, you're a kid and you just play with somebody and he's just part of your community and there's not much there. Like as a kid, you're not out here having like in-depth conversations about colonialism and race and belonging. Like that's just not what it is. And so I think I was also struck by my own process of that. And then I think knowing what I knew now about the world, about the history of colonization, about all kinds of things, I think all these things started kind of flooding into my mind. And I just, in my mind, I think that's the spark that kind of started. And I think the other part was also just knowing that Josiah, the memory I have of him is like this like super sweet kid that's just loved basketball and was always super hyper. And to kind of have this like headline that says like banned from a tournament just felt really jarring. And also just kind of clinical almost, like in reading headlines, it's sort of talking about all these big issues. But for me, it's like, oh, how is he feeling? I think for me, that's what I was like really concerned about. And so I ended up kind of reaching out to Don and asking him, hey, like, would you be open to sort of like, you know, me documenting what's happening? And he was generous enough to say yes. And then I also wanted to make sure I had a conversation with everyone in the family to be like, hey, remember me from like way back? Like I think there's something really important that's happening with everything that's happening with the tournament. And so I spoke to everybody in the family just to kind of let them know what I was trying to do. And everybody thankfully were just really generous in allowing me to be a part of their lives. I don't think any of us knew that it was going to take as long as it did, because of all the twists and turns that you can like see in the film. But yeah, they were patient with my million questions. But Josiah, I'll say, like, he wasn't as open in the beginning, and rightfully so, because I think when the news broke out, a lot of media kept wanting to interview him, and it was really overwhelming. And so from that process, he just was like, I don't want to deal. And so his dad was kind of the one that kind of took on a lot of that. And so when I came back in to be like, hey, can you talk about this thing that was really painful? He, you know, rightfully so, he just wasn't really game. And so I didn't expect him to be all warm and fuzzy to be able to do it. But I think I mean, I was persistent. I was very persistent. And also I think what helped is the fact that his whole family also was very trusting of me, because they also know my family. Like, there's an accountability there for me too, that like, if I mess this up, they know what parents like I think there's that rapport that I always remembered. And so I think the fact that the family was around and they were also supportive of the process, I think also helped in sort of eventually kind of getting Josiah to like slowly chip away at his wall. But it also, I think it took us just a lot of time. It took us about a couple of years. Like, we filmed for about 4 years. And so it took a minute. That was a long-winded, but yeah.
No, that was perfect. It gives a lot of context, because you could feel the intimacy through the film. Like, there are points where there's certain conversations that you could tell that the producer that you were having with Josiah, where I of course could recognize your voice. And that's where I really did wonder. I was like, is this a friendship that was developed through the process of this film, or was this trust already established from a long time ago? Because you can really feel the trust between you guys. And I don't think the film would have come out the way it did without that trust.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, it's one thing to know somebody when you were like, 10 years old, and it's a whole other thing to I think, to me, I feel like we had to reintroduce ourselves through the process of that. Like, because I didn't know him. Like, there was like years that passed that I didn't know about, which I discovered in the process of sort of doing this whole work, right? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think it's that reintroduction, and then the time, like the length of time, that kind of helped us kind of get there. Yeah.
What was it like figuring out the mechanics of the film, like who your team is going to be? What tell me a bit about that process, about when you confirmed that this was a project that Josiah and the Wilson family trusted you with. What was it like locating a team and figuring out how you want to go about this film?
I mean, it was a lot of things. I'm trying to think of like, how do I answer that? I think it kind of happened, I don't want to say organically, but I guess in retrospect, maybe it was organic. It didn't feel organic. It didn't feel organic. I like, essentially it's like, you know, the news happens and I just feel like everything is happening now. Like, I think my journalism spidey senses were like, okay, I have to, like, this is happening now. So like, we got to go now. Like, I don't know where the money's coming from or how, but it has to happen now. And so, you know, like a lot of filmmakers, it's kind of like the whole thing of like, you borrow somebody's, like I didn't have a camera. And so I borrowed my friend's, my friend was very generous and let me borrow his camera when I was going to Calgary to visit my family. And I was like, oh, while I'm in Calgary, let me just like catch up and I'll have my camera and hopefully grab something. And maybe whatever I get could help me get money. Cause at that point I had no money. And so it was kind of like the hustle of doing that. And then after and then also continuously keeping in touch because I'm in Toronto. Right. And so, for me, I really value connection and the relationship I have with the people whose stories I'm telling. So I tried my best to just like check in and kind of know a little bit about their lives the moment that in my mind, I was like going to try to tell this story. And so, yeah, it was doing that. And then after I was able to film whatever I filmed, I was able to get into a program with the Doc Ontario, called Breakthrough. And so that program was helpful because it basically helped me hone in my pitch for this. And it also put me in front of broadcasters. And so in that program, I was able to get introduced to Jordana Ross at the documentary channel. And she basically, we basically had a conversation after I did that program, and she was just really excited about the project and decided to support us from development and production. And the moment that they came on board, it just became a bit of like a not a roller coaster, but like a, what's it called? What's that expression? Whatever, the ball rolling. There you go. Yeah. So that's kind of how that happened. I mean, do you want to know like how I got my crew together, like my team, my producers?
I mean, if you think that's something that you want to share,
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I got lucky. Like I think I was really just hungry to try to find a way to do this. So I was just looking at anything I could apply to, that I could qualify to, that I could find money. And so I met my producer, Laura Perlmutter, at TIFF. There was like a grant that TIFF had a few years ago that was in partnership with ESPN to support first-time documentary filmmakers whose subject matter had to do with sports. And so I was like, oh, okay, I could qualify. Did not get that grant, but when I went, I ended up meeting Laura and I shared my project. And she was really interested in it. And so we ended up just having a conversation. That's kind of how that process got started. So yeah.
Yes. Dope. You began your career as a writer many years ago. You've contributed quite amount as a journalist. What made you explore film as a new medium of text or expression for you?
That's a good question. I like this question. I haven't been asked that question yet. Yeah. I think for me, when I went to journalism school, I never felt like, first off, I liked so many different things. I like radio. I liked a little bit of writing, not all the writing. I was a terrible reporter. I think it was very stressful, at least for me as an experience. Like I did not enjoy reporting. My colleagues, bless them, loved it and they are thriving and I'm happy for them. But that was just not for me. But I found myself when I was in journalism school gravitating towards mediums that kind of gave more space, because I think the part about hard news reporting that always kind of didn't really sit with me is the fact that oftentimes it felt very extractive. Like you go in, you get the soundbite that you need, and then you have to file for a deadline, but you don't really get to sit with the people whose stories you're taking, because that's the purpose of reporting. And so I always felt like, I don't know, there was something about that extraction that I didn't really enjoy. And I think for me, my instinct was always to try to take as much time with people and sit with them a little bit longer. Sorry, my computer's doing something funny. And so yeah, I just and so that's why I think eventually I ended up kind of getting pulled into radio documentaries. And I felt like, yeah, that gives us space to kind of live in with people maybe a little bit longer. And in terms of the pivot to film, I think I've always wanted to do film. Like I feel like I always wanted to do film, but I was always terrified to admit it to both myself, let alone people around me. So even when I was in journalism school doing my master's, I was like, I took a little film program outside of school. So I was doing it part-time outside of that, just to like learn how to like write, how to shoot. I didn't go to film school, but I was on YouTube trying to learn everything that I could. And then at some point I had a little web series I tried to put on YouTube, interviewing people. I will not say the name of the thing that I used to do, but it was just like, yeah, it was always something that I wanted to do. But I think I was like, oh no, this is like too big. Like, and yeah, it felt impossible for me to be able to own and claim. And so journalism felt safe, even though, is journalism safe? No. Like, another ethical question. But yeah, so that's kind of, and I feel like, yeah, when the story kind of came about, I think because I remember for me, I'm like, this has to be a film to me, because I think part of it was that I felt like no one would believe me if I told them about it, in a way, you know, like in terms of just the dynamics that I saw that were at play. There's something striking about image. And I think like that was just like very clear for me from the beginning, that this has to be a film, not a radio doc, not a whatever other medium. Like that felt like it had to be a film. Yeah.
I agree. I don't know if this story would have hit me the same way, or any of us the same way, without, you know, seeing the what's being communicated through the facial expressions of Josiah and his father during certain moments, or his father and Mariah during certain points when there's tension between them. Yeah, I love that. That I definitely understand what you mean. That there's only so far that words can take you, and the visual or the image can communicate a far more in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
When was the first moment that you first tapped into your instinct for storytelling?
Ooh, what?
Sorry, these are
Yo, it's like hard hitters. Say that again from the top.
Yeah, of course. When was the first moment, or when was that moment that you first tapped into your instinct for storytelling?
I don't know if there was actually a moment. Like I feel like it's been such a process to recognize my own voice, you know? Like I think there's a kind of like I think a lot about my training as a journalist, and how much, you know, in journalism school, I think I will say that it at least the one I went to at Ryerson, made it a point to sort of talk about instincts. But then I always found it challenging, because I felt like what I felt was my instinct wasn't the instincts that was rewarded. You know, like for instance, if I was pitching a story and I felt like it's important to kind of talk about the fact that like the victim was Black or something, then I would write that report, and then the feedback in my grades would be like, was that a relevant at least at the time of my journalism school, was like, was that a relevant detail? And I think sometimes when I was in journalism school, I was always a bit annoyed at like, I'm like, well, my instinct says that that's a part of the story and it has to be, but then the institution kind of tells you that it's not valid. And so I feel like the tension between that has always been a thing. And I think my desire to pursue film and to try to tell this project was also an exercise for me to listen to myself and to trust it. Because I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel like throughout the entire process of even making the film, I was completely riddled with imposter syndrome. And I felt very much beyond my depth of like, what am I doing? Am I the right person to tell this story? All of those questions stayed with me from the beginning all the way to the end. And so I will say I'm happy and grateful that at this stage, on the other side of it, there's a different kind of revelation, I think, for me, in terms of like validating the fact that I fought for the things that I fought for, and people are able to see that in the work. Because it's also important to note that I had never made a film in my life, so the learning curve in this process was quite steep, not just in terms of the content of the story that I was really interested in telling, but also the medium itself and what it means to communicate using film, using moving imagery. And then, yeah, like you can add in a bunch of things like, how do you sustain yourself doing this at the same time? That's a whole other conversation. But yeah, like, I think like, yeah, I'm still working on it, but I think it's been a process. And yeah, like, I feel like it's only, I feel like now the film is done, I'm like, okay, yeah, like I'm a filmmaker. Like throughout the entire time, I was like, we're going to try real hard, and we might fail, and maybe that's okay. But yeah, like, I think for me, truly, like the conversation I had with myself was like, do the best that you can. And that's it. Like, I just have to, for my own self, just like do the best that I can with what I'm given. And so I work my ass off. So yeah.
You should put a note somewhere on your wall just for any possible future imposter syndrome, that after your first debut film, you were nominated for 3 Canadian Screen Awards. Just a reminder.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's so wild. It's so crazy.
And well deserving. Truly, I'm super proud.
Thank you.
This question, we could tap into it, or we can kind of dance around if you want. It's up to you. Mm-hmm. But I was wondering what parts of the Canadian film canon or the Black diasporic canon, we don't have to think within borders, but what parts of whatever various film canons were you considering in your creation of One of Ours? Like what were there other documentaries or other films, their approaches, or the approach of the directors or producers through that project that influenced how you wanted to go about creating and making One of Ours?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I knew I wanted to make this film, I tried to look for films that dealt with identity. I tried to look for films that dealt with belonging, and films also that like talked about this very specific intersection of indigeneity and Blackness. And there wasn't. I couldn't find anything that touched on precisely like the two. And so that was interesting, not surprising, but also for me, it was also like, I mean, from the beginning, regardless of whether or not there would be a reference, it was like, I have to get this right. Right? Like, we know what it's like to have a story told about, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and have that go wrong and the harm that can cause, because we don't get to have multiple stories to choose from, it, right? And so that's number one. But in terms of references, I think when I started out, I had like this idea of what I wanted to do just as an artist to like, yeah, like there were feelings and things that I wanted to do, but then I had to get to know Josiah. I had to really get to know him. And what I found is that I had this creative thing that was like a little bit artsy, a little bit off, that I wanted to do, that it didn't make sense. It just didn't make sense. And so to me, even if I had these references, like I love Barry Jenkins' Moonlight is sort of like my gold star, right? For so many things, like a lot of other filmmakers, but that's like a really big one for me. And like finding moments of quietness and intimacy that kind of tell you things without somebody telling you they're feeling things or experiencing things.
Yeah.
But then I kind of had to throw a lot of it out the window in some ways and just go where Josiah wants to go, and however far he wants to go is kind of how I go. And then just trust the process of documentary. Like as much as I could plan, you kind of have to like surrender to the process of like what you'll find. Like for instance, like I think a lot about like one of my favorite moments in the film is the interview that I did with Mariah on the boat. And that one, it was like, that shoot, first of all, was crazy and very stressful, but it was like, we didn't know what the boat was going to look like. We had a very short amount of time, and, but it happened so organically and serendipitously. Like we planned, like I had planned this intentionally, that I wanted to do an interview framed in that specific way, just because of the layers and the history that comes with Black women in their hair. And not only that, but it's like this specific Haitian Black Healthsuk woman in Bella Bella getting her hair braided. Like there's a lot of layers there. And so I wasn't sure how to communicate that, but to me, I'm like, for my own selfish artistic needs, like I needed that to happen in that specific kind of way. That one was like completely just like my brain.
Was that you braiding her hair?
It was. It was. Yeah.
I also, while watching that scene, was like, oh yeah, Yaz literally is probably the biggest expert on hair I've ever lived with.
Yep.
You actually taught me how to moisturize my hair shamelessly.
I love it. I love that so much.
Just a reminder for folks in the audience, you are more than welcome to submit your questions. I have only one or two more for Yasmine, and then we'll be moving on towards pre-submitted questions and any audience questions. So feel free to get those in, and we'll get to those in a bit. So Josiah really grapples with kinship, healing, the meaning of forgiveness. And you can also tell that he's dealing a lot with grief in relation to his community, and in relation to his home, in relation to his identity, but also this really heavy grief of Papa, right? Who clearly is, that was a part of the film that really touched me the most. And I think that's something maybe many of us can relate to, particularly in the wake of a pandemic and being overexposed to grief. But you could really see how he's drawing from this unconditional love, this really strong bond with someone who's transcended, and is really drawing from that space, that place, to continue to find the courage to, fight back, to claim himself. How is Josiah doing, and what's for him personally, I guess, how has he felt about the response of this film, or the response from other people, or the sharing of the story?
It's been really great. It's been so validating. I think he was worried and also very skeptical of the process in a way. I think I call him my reluctant hero, because I think throughout the entire process, he was like baby steps, but very slowly. And every day it was like, he gives what he can, and sometimes it's a little bit, and sometimes it's a lot, and that's okay. And so I think it's been really great to have people express their love of the film, because it kind of, I think it really opened his eyes in terms of like his place in a lot of ways. Like, I think, because throughout the whole time we would have so many different conversations. He'd be like, no one's going to care. Like, some Black kid in Calgary playing basketball, like, why would this matter? And so I think it's just been such a gift, you know, to be able to kind of show him what I saw from the beginning. And it's not coming from me anymore. It's coming from people who get to experience his story through the film. And I'm just like, that's like the biggest gift I feel like from this process, is that he's able to kind of see that and sit with it. You know, I'm sure it's going to take a lot of time, because not everybody gets a film made about their lives in their like mid-20s, which is really hard, because being in your mid-20s is messy and hard. And so his courage is incredible for having gone through this process. And so I think, yeah, I just think that it's going to take time, and he's just been really overjoyed with this whole process of being able to engage with the film and get to hear people's feedback, and like these awards as well, is like, it's been a gift. So
love that. So these are some pre-submitted questions. What was your artistic process to decide on this story to be your debut feature film? You kind of, I feel like you kind of got at that, but
yeah. Well, funny enough, like in the beginning, I was like, because I had made a film before, so I was like, oh yeah, like I'll make, like, this will be a short film, and then I could do a feature, because I knew in my brain that like there's room for a feature, but I think I was very fearful of it was just like the whole imposter syndrome thing, that like I'm really diving deep before dipping my toe into anything. And so that doesn't add, I don't know if that adds to anything, but
no, it does. Okay. What is one or some of the misconceptions or biases that you had before the journey of filming Josiah's story, and what is different now?
Misconceptions that I had about Josiah?
The misconceptions that you had about misconceptions or biases that you had before the journey of filming Josiah Wilson's story. I think the assumption might be here too, that you didn't know Josiah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no. I mean, I think, yeah, it's like we knew each other, but it's like you knowing somebody when you're 10 is not knowing somebody when you're 25. Like it's just not. And so I didn't really have much perceptions, because he's not really online like that. And so even if I tried to like Google him, he wasn't really on Facebook. He barely like, yeah. And so I don't know. That question's a bit, I feel like I hope I answered some of it. I don't know. Okay.
There's a second part to the question. I think it's the person, just like myself, probably wasn't aware that you knew Josiah.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to switch now to some of the audience submitted questions. I have one more backup just in case, but I'll leave it if we have time. So Evelyn asked, could you speak about how the community in Bella Bella felt about your filming? That's a really interesting one, actually. Did it ever feel confusing about whose story you were telling, since there were so many simultaneous narratives going on? For instance, the sister's move to Bella Bella, her coming out, which was that was a big, I feel like that was a whole conversation itself, but her coming out, the community getting a new big house, etc. So I'll just repeat it one more time.
Maybe the first part, and then we can like break it down. What's the first one?
Yeah. Could you speak about how the community in Bella Bella felt about your filming?
Yeah, and so how before we went, we reached out to Pam, who's Josiah's aunt, who's in the film. You see her a little bit at the beginning, you see her at the end at the washing ceremony.
Right.
Pam is Dawn's, Pam is Josiah's aunt, and she lives in Bella Bella. So she knew about the fact that we were going to tell the story. And so she sort of was our entryway in terms of connecting with the community in Bella Bella and making sure that the community was aware that we're doing the film, and that they were okay with that process. Particularly, I think I'm so grateful for their generosity, because every time we went to Bella Bella, it was just so much openness and love in terms of allowing us to be there and to and just to capture the moments that needed to be captured. We had so many different wonderful interviews that we were able to do with some of the elders in Bella Bella who just brought so much insight for me in terms of understanding why it was so important for Heiltsuk Nation to fight for Josiah. I think within the process of like editing and making the film, it became a bit challenging to try to I'm still sad that I wasn't able to add that in there. But for myself as a director, understanding their perspective was so important in terms of making sure that I tell the story right for every single side of it, right? I'm not an Indigenous person. And so I came in never assuming knowing anything, but also having this sort of shared, almost like a shared experience of colonialism.
Yeah.
It's like you can kind of recognize things when they happen sometimes in a way. And so I think, and also how complicated it is, you know? And so I think, I'm just grateful for the way that the relationships I was able to build in the process. So I don't know if that answers that part of the question. What's the second?
The second part was, did it ever feel confusing about whose story you were telling, since there were so many simultaneous narratives going on?
Yes. It was very hard. It was very hard because, you know, I think I could have probably made a film about every member of the family, and it would have been compelling. It was a real challenge. It was a puzzle, and I'm so grateful for the team that I had, that I wasn't alone in terms of trying to wrestle with like the storyline. But I think for me, what helped me get through the mechanics of the story and was knowing for me that my anchor was Josiah and his journey and what does he want. So even if we're somewhere and there's all this stuff that's happening, how do we connect it to what Josiah wants? Yeah. I think for me, that's sort of, at least for me, that was sort of my guiding light in the process. And then, yeah, everything else that sort of is around him were kind of almost in service of Josiah's journey. But yeah, he was my sort of guiding light, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. We have some more questions coming in. Teresina Costa asked, there's a real intimacy and vulnerability and rawness to this film. Now knowing your history and connection to the family really shows through in how respectful you were telling their story. I agree. Trusting your instinct was a gift in how you told this very important human story. Congratulations on your art and craft of film. So that was actually feedback, not this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Teresina. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, but I really appreciate that. That's very kind.
And then Mathieu asked, how is the family doing right now?
Yeah, everybody's great. Everybody's super excited that more people are able to experience the film. And yeah, like Josiah is in Calgary and he's He's looking for work. If anybody wants to hire him, putting the word out. Yeah, everybody's doing really great, and yeah, I don't know what else to add. Just everybody's great.
Sweet. And then this is going to be our last question before we return back to Charlie. What's next for you?
Ooh. What is next for me? A few things. I'm working on a few things, and I feel like where I'm at right now is like I just want to rest, because it took a lot to make this film. It took a lot out of me in a lot of ways. As much as it gave a lot, it also required a lot. And so right now I'm thinking a lot about rest. And then in the same breath, I'm also trying to figure out how to keep doing this work sustainably, because documentary work is not for the faint of heart. So I think I'm trying to navigate that and my own capacity to do it. And then I'm trying to make another film. And I don't know where that's gonna go anymore, but it's like, right now I'm cautiously optimistic that I'll find a way to tell it. And that project, I will say briefly, is like, it's an animated short documentary about my family, about belonging.
Like this.
And so I'm excited about that possibility. And then I'm also writing a fiction screenplay at the moment. And yeah. So I'm navigating that part of it. And yeah, man, I just want to like be happy and make movies and somehow also get paid just to be able to pay rent. So that's kind of where my head is at, if I'm keeping it real right now. But yeah,
I 100% get that. Same thing with writing. That's a very real thing in Toronto for us.
Yeah. I think there was another question that got thrown in there, but I don't know if you have time.
So Anne Brown asked, this film was so authentic. How did you manage to capture the essence of the authenticity of Josiah's experience?
I feel like Josiah from the very beginning was very unapologetic about who he was. And I just wanted to honor that. Like I think the film would not be the film without Josiah being himself. For better or for worse, whether it was the moments where he was not wanting to open up or the moments where he was really raw. And so I think that's 100% credit to him and who he is. He didn't really care that I was the person telling, like with the camera, or the one that wasn't. I think who you see in the film is also who he is outside of it. So yeah, that's 100% credit to Josiah. Like, yeah.
There was something very comfortable about him and Mariah. And I did continuously wonder what that process was like for him to lay his heart bare with the camera in front of him, and show the different complexities that he was going through, right? We saw the anger, we saw the sadness, we saw the grief, we saw the deep love and the happiness, we saw it all from him.
I think, just sorry to add, I don't know if we really have to go, but to add to that though, I think for me, knowing that I was going to tell a story about healing, I also knew that I might not actually be able to tell a story where at the very end, there's going to be something. There's going to be a moment where he's like, I'm healed now and I'm good. Like, it's something that's super internal. So I think for me, my process also as a director was, I was going to challenge him to questions that will be uncomfortable. And whether or not he's able to get there is not really the point. I think the point for me was the wrestling of it. It was the confronting of it. Because I think so many times in our own lives, when there are things that we might need to heal from, we don't necessarily want to confront. And so I think it was a process film in a lot of ways for both of us. Because to me also, it was like, I didn't want to, like what happened in the process, just out, you know, behind the camera for me was also like, I never wanted to like ask him questions that I couldn't ask myself in my own life.
Right.
And so in the process, I started therapy, you know, like I started to really think about my own relationship with my parents and my dad and my own stuff, you know, like, cause I never want to really assume an authority. Even if I am the one with the camera, I think there's always going to be a bit of I think it's always going to be unbalanced because I think that's just what it is. But as much as I can, I try to find ways within my own process to kind of even the scales a little bit around the emotional ask of this. So
I love that. I absolutely love that. I know we're supposed to wrap up, but I kind of want to ask a follow-up question about what made you decide what made you decide that therapy was a necessary part of that process in order for you to ask, you know, those type of questions?
I think for me, it was just for my own stuff. Cause it's like, I don't know, like, who am I to ask him about his own life? Like, I think for me, those are things that came up for me is like, yeah, he's not going to answer that. If somebody were to ask me that, would I answer that? Probably not. And so the logic of that kind of is what kind of, I don't know if this is how, I don't know how the filmmakers work, but I think for this particular work and the questions that I was wrestling with thematically, it just felt like what I needed to do. And I also wanted to move with as much care as I could, both for myself and him. And so there's, you know, and that's also an element of, I think, documentary film that I feel like should be talked about more is like the emotional work of it. And also the care that needs to happen on every angle possible, like from the director holding space for their subjects, you know, because you have to build this sort of emotional connection. And we do so willingly, but also there has to be a balance too, because this work takes in a lot of ways, right? Like I'm not, yeah. So anyway, I could probably ramble a lot more about that, but
I do have to say that I really commend that and deeply respect that. I think that's a really ethical approach to, like you said, balancing the power dynamic between the observer and the observed. And I would argue is in many ways a Black feminist approach to filmmaking. I think that's something very interesting and beautiful. And I would love to hear more about that in the future. I appreciate that, Yasmine. And I love Coronavirus. Thank you for creating this for us.
Thank you for watching it. Super happy to have been invited by Innis College to be able to show the film and to talk about it and kind of just like discuss it. Like this part is like super fun for me. So yay.
You were wonderful. Thank
you. Well, I just want to say, Yasmine, that you'll understand why I'm going to call it this in a moment when I call this an onion film. And not just because it makes you cry, but because cutting into it, you get all these layers. And film keeps surprising you because you think you have a handle on what it's doing and where it's going. And then something else comes, which deepens it. And I was thinking, how is she going to bring us to a point? There's not going to be any easy resolution. There's not going to be any pat ending. And yet the ending was so satisfying. And we know that life is not full or defined by satisfying endings, but films do have to complete themselves. And you manage to strike that balance of both giving us an ending, which gives us a level of satisfaction while acknowledging the messiness and the unfinished nature of life. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. And funny on the thought about the onion, that was precisely what I wanted. It was literally something that I wanted the film to be experienced like an onion. Like I didn't want you to know what was at the middle layer. Like I wanted you to feel for each layer all the way through. So it's so validating to hear that people even just naturally bring it up. And I'm like, this is exactly what I wanted.
And also, I'll just say also a true, which is one of the best features of documentaries that are predicated on interviews with different subjects, a true generosity of spirit towards everyone in the film, which was really also so rewarding. So thank you. Thank you very much for your film. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you, Huda, for your moderating. Thanks to all of our audience for coming. Let me mention the two next films we have as part of Black History Month in the Canadian Film Forum series. On February 24th, we have Akila's Escape, and we welcome back director Charles Officer, who was here with Unarmed Verses a number of years ago, and that will be moderated by Yasmine Kanji. And then on February 28th, only a few days later, Beyond Moving, with the director Vikram Dasgupta and the subject Sipe November, who is a dancer with the National Ballet. And the moderator for that will be Deirdre Kelly. So please join us for those two films. We've set a high standard, but I think we're going to try to meet it. And thank you again to our two guests, and for everyone at Innis, Ned, Victoria, Shayla, Ennis, Ben, for setting this all up. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.
Awesome. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.